Hey, good morning, everyone. We're about to get started here on our Microsoft 365 Modern Work Security series. Today covering the second piece of our Endpoint Manager around Android and iOS devices. And so I'd like to thank you for joining us today. My name is Lori Martinez, and I am a Modern Work Solutions Specialist here to help moderate and assist with answering your questions. I'm placing a link in the chat in just a few minutes for any feedback, so that way you can let us know how we're doing and offer your suggestions. The feedback that we get is extremely important to us, and so this is really how we know how to make these webinars better for you. And so let me put that in really quickly here as the feedback form. Let's see. All right. Now, the past few weeks and months, actually, we've been presenting on a variety of things within our security stack here at Microsoft Modern Work piece. The identity and authentication with Azure AD, some features of our Defender product with Defender for Endpoint and O365. And this week, we're continuing the mobile device and application management discussion with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So as stated, we will be focusing on the Android and iOS management pieces, covering topics such as compliance and configuration policies, different enrollment options, and how you can partner Azure AD conditional access with the device compliance. Today, you have Hunter Hogan and myself helping to moderate, and we do have technical specialist Christian Cabela presenting over Endpoint Manager. Please feel free to post any questions in the chat. And if you happen to have additional questions or want more information outside of this webinar, please reach out to your dedicated sales specialist or partner. Additionally, if you don't know who that is, you can reach out to me directly and I'll find out and get you connected there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Christian to get started on the presentation piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. My name is Christian Cabela. I'm a technical specialist of our Dallas office, and I focus around the Microsoft 365 product suites, productivity. Today, I'm going to be covering something that is extremely important to a lot of our customers with the remote workforce. Today, I'm going to be talking about Microsoft Endpoint Manager pertaining to mobility for iOS and Android platforms. So technology needs are evolving in the modern workplace. We know that the reality is that we're living in the classical, traditional IT, and there's a real tension here, right? So IT departments have built themselves around the traditional PC life cycles, managing images, controlling updates, locking down behavior, protecting users. And so the reality is that IT is evolving and adapting. And we see here that more and more customers and more users are bringing a single device, right? There is some users that are using multiple devices. There's business-owned device, and there's also user and business-owned applications. There's a lot of conflicting, a lot of overlap, and how do you manage that overlap, right? So we have our solution to that problem is Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And Microsoft Endpoint Manager is a cloud-based that enables transformative platforms for unified and security endpoint management. It's a cloud-driven that has a lot of great intelligence, that has a unified admin console that allows you to manage your mobile devices, iOS, Android, right? We see a lot of customers tend to integrate things such as MDM, right? To be able to push out applications to end user devices, right? Be able to push out app protection policies for the different types of user base, whether it's mobile application management to protect their corporate data. We have a lot of great endpoint analytics within Microsoft Endpoint Manager, and it just has a great endpoint management capabilities across our Microsoft 365 stack. So some of the key benefits within our product, within our Microsoft Endpoint Manager is it's really secure and intelligent. It allows you to, it's natively integrates with a lot of our cloud-powered security controls, right? Whether we can integrate Microsoft Endpoint Manager with conditional access, and you can use conditional access to be able to control how devices are accessing your cloud resources, right? Maybe you might have you want to prevent users from accessing email unless their device is managed, right? Here at Microsoft, for example, we really push and we encourage a lot of our end users to be able to enroll the device, and our devices are protected to ensure that there's no malicious actors that may attack our end users, right? You can deploy app protection policy profiles to your devices to ensuring that users are separating their corporate data from their personal data. And we have a really great unified management. So there's a one admin console that allows you that even provides you guided deployments. You can push out M365 enterprise apps such as Microsoft Edge. You can configure what that end user capability and the user experience will be like for those users. We also offer some really great zero-touch provisioning. Right? Maybe you might have iOS devices in your organization that you issue out to your users. Right? You can integrate that with Apple Business Manager to be able to push that zero-touch provisioning experience from your cellular vendor directly to your end users, right? We also have a really great integration with Android devices, right? Where you can deploy Android for work profiles, right? Or Android for business, where you can allows the users to be able to use one Android device and also separate the containers between the two. Right. And we have there's a really great an investment that allows you to accelerate to the value of rolling out. You can roll out applications to users. It's a really great tool because it integrates across all of our other Microsoft 365 products. And I'll pause there for a second. Laura, do we have any questions so far?
Nothing so far, Christian.
All right, great. So a lot of customers may be wondering, what does the licensing look like for Endpoint Manager, right? Intune or Microsoft Endpoint Manager is included in the following licenses. So if you have an E5 license, you have an E3 license that comes with it, right? If you're using Enterprise Mobility plus Security E5, if you're using E3, Business Premium F1, F3, it comes with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And you can also purchase Microsoft Endpoint Manager as a standalone, right? We see some customers that they may have shared devices that may just need a device license. So we do offer that capability as well. So the next area that I want to talk about is give you guys a overview of what and how conditional access works across our within Azure AD and Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So conditional access, think of it as a access control policy that allows you to be able to use a user and the device that they're utilizing to authenticate and try to access your cloud resources. So if you see here, for example, we may have a user who's using a couple of devices, right? So we might have a user who's using an Android or iOS device. That user is using that device to be able to try to access certain cloud resources here on the right side. So before accessing those resources, in your conditional access, we have our policies, right, that are triggered through machine learning. That also there might be some session controls, some real-time evaluation engines, and it checks to make sure that whatever the policy that we have against the control that the user that's using that device is able to access those resources securely. So in our demo, when I go to my next step, we'll show you guys a demo. I'll show you guys how we can leverage conditional access to be able to require a user to enroll their device before they can access cloud resources. Or we could even create, and I'll show you guys how to create a policy in conditional access to be able to require a device to use app protection policy. So conditional access checks, you can create a condition against different controls and policies to allow or restrict how a user can access different cloud resources, right? So we've got here on the right side, we can block access, we can limit access, we can require MFA, we require password resets, right? We can even block legacy authentication if there is an on-premises dependency there. Before I dive into our demo, is there any questions, Laura? Are we seeing any questions in our Q&A?
Nothing's come through yet, Christian.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for checking, though. I appreciate that.
All right. So in the next slide here, I'm going to be walking you guys through on the admin console. I'll show you guys how to configure different policies across Endpoint Manager. And then I'll show you guys as well how those conditional access policies can be configured. So in order to get to Endpoint Manager, simply just need to go to endpoint.microsoft.com. Right here. Once you get to Endpoint Manager, you see a couple of things, right? You see different things such as your status, right? If there's any enrollment failures within your tenant, you can see the status health of your tenant. You can see that if the admin account is active, right? You can see any client apps that may have failed, any connectors that you've integrated with your tenant, any device configurations that may be pushed out that may have failed, any service health, right? If Intune or the service is not working, we'll be able to get those details as well. So I'm gonna simply go into my devices here, and I'll show you first the Android or the iOS in the iOS experience. So a couple of things here to note on iOS. When we go to enroll our iOS devices, Intune does show us how what the prerequisite for each platform that is needed in order to enroll. So for example, for iOS devices, we require every MDM essentially requires a MDM push certificate that needs to be recognized by the tenant, right? So here we need to have an active we need to have an active MDM push certificate uploaded for Intune or Endpoint Manager to be able to recognize that, right? And we also have a couple of enrollment methods, right? If a user wants to, or an IT admin wants to bulk enrollment through Apple Configurator, they can use Apple Configurator as a way of enrolling. Just a note here, this does require a macOS device in order to use Apple Configurator. And then also we have enrollment program tokens, right? This is going to be configured, especially if you want to use that as that zero-touch provisioning. You can create your profiles, your enrollment profile tokens, and here we can specify exactly how we want when that device talks to Apple services, what that enrollment experience looks like. Right? We can block Siri. We can hide certain capabilities whenever the user loads that device. And now, if we go into the compliance policies for our iOS devices, we can create a couple of policies here. Right? So in the compliance policies, we can define how and which devices or what kind of compliance that the device needs to meet in order to access certain cloud resources. So if I just go here and I just create a demo policy, okay. We'll give this a description. So in the compliance policies, we can do a couple of things, right? We can specify the device health. We see this being leveraged a lot, blocking jailbroken devices, requiring devices to be under a device threat level. So if you're using a threat protection, third-party integration services, or maybe Defender for Endpoint, you can define the security level for that device. We can also require the minimum OS, right? So we can specify what is the minimum OS that the device needs to meet in order to in order to enroll that device, right? So let's say we want to block iOS, or the minimum required OS is 13, right? So we can define that. And maybe as well here, we can also specify the maximum build OS, right? Because maybe there's some users that may be using a beta software that can pose a risk to your organization, so we can block them. Now, for some customers who are using Defender for Endpoint, you can use Defender for Endpoint as a threat, as a risk score against your devices. So here, for example, at Microsoft, we have Defender for Endpoint integrated with Endpoint Manager. So we require every user to have Defender for Endpoint on their mobile devices in order to access certain corporate resources. Okay? And then here as well, we can define our password policies. We see a lot of customers blocking simple passwords. We can define the different password policies, right? Once we have our policies created, we can actually also take action on the devices that do not meet those compliance, right? So by default, we automatically mark the device as compliant. Right? That we can also take additional action upon the devices that don't meet that compliance, such as sending an email to the end user. If you have a template created, you can use a template that you can send out, and then you can add additional recipients, right? Maybe you want to add your security teams to that additional as an additional recipient to be able to get details about why the user is not compliant, right? And also, you can take a couple of actions, take additional actions, such as remote locking the non-compliant device, or just simply retiring the device off completely from your tenant. All right. So once we have that, then we can assign our policies. We can assign it to all the users within our organization. If we have an AD group that you want to leverage, you can assign that policy to those groups. So I'll go ahead and assign it to our Modern Workplace group. And also, we can also exclude the groups, right? So here I've just excluded from our Modern Workplace team. If you want to assign it to all users within an organization, you can assign it, and also you can exclude it. You can exclude it from certain groups. And here I've just assigned it to an excluded group. I'll go ahead and remove that, and we're just going to go ahead and create it, and that's it. So once we have the policy created, depending on the AD group that the user is assigned to, will determine whether or not that user hits that policy. Okay. And once we have, once the user starts enrolling the devices, we'll be able to see things such as the different statuses of those policies. Right. We can get a device statuses to see the status of the policy against that, the status of the policy against the device. We can see it against the user, or the per setting status against which settings were actually were successfully assigned to that device, which ones didn't meet, right? So we can get all those granular cloud analytics on that. So I'll go back. Do we have any questions on the iOS enrollment?
Nothing so far, Christian.
Awesome, great. So the next piece I'm going to go is on our Android platform. Now, for Android enrollment, we offer a couple of different types of enrollment profiles. So we provide a personally owned devices with work profiles, right? This is where the user self-enrolls their device through MDM. When they enroll the device through MDM, then what happens is on Android devices, the user gets they may see the same application, but the application that is corporate owned will have a different type of indication on that application. For example, we've seen some OSs of Android, they might have an orange banner next to the application. Some applications may have a briefcase next to it. I've seen on some Samsung devices that actually when the user goes to their applications, there's a separate tab for work apps. And in there, that's how Android handles the work profile, right? And then we also allow a couple of things here, right? We also provide corporate owned fully managed user devices, right? This is going to be more traditionally for organizations that may be issuing corporate-owned Android devices to their users, right? This allows the users to self-enroll the device against the fully managed, and the admin can actually fully manage the device, and in return still allowing the users to maybe use, for example, the Play Store. For the corporate dedicated devices here, these are going to be specific corporate-owned devices in which the corporate purchases the devices, and they want to issue those devices out to their end users, right? In this case here, what happens is the full device is being managed by the organization, and the admin can actually control and manage how the device and what the user experience is on that device. We've seen this use case primarily for kiosks and different task devices, right? And then here we have what is called corporate-owned with work profiles, right? This may be the corporate-owned devices that are issued out to the user that allows them to give them some flexibility to be able to do certain personal tasks on the devices. Now, something to note, Microsoft, we do not see any personal data on any user's devices when they're enrolled. The only thing that Microsoft and what the admin can see are just the managed applications, right? So if the users have any personally downloaded apps on their devices, we don't see that on the tenant. We don't collect that at all. Okay. Now, something to see here, I'll show you here. The personally owned devices with work profile, we've actually replaced this from our legacy Android device administrator. This was what traditionally how users would enroll the devices, but Android actually switched over and now allows users to use the work profiles. Okay. Now, for the enrollment for the corporate-owned devices, it's pretty straightforward. In order to make that happen, you can allow the users to self-enroll, and you can create this QR code here. Once the QR code is created, then the users simply just during the setup process, the users would just simply scan this QR code, and it'll start enrolling the device as a corporate fully managed user, and it'll be able to take the user to that workflow. Okay. The next piece here that I'm gonna talk about is the compliance policies for Android. We have a couple of policies, right? Depending on the platform and the enrollment type, we can see here, right? We do have fully managed. You can create policies for a fully managed Android device, right? Which is Android Enterprise, and also for work profiles, right? That would be for more of those BYOD use cases. So if we go here, for example, Android Enterprise, we have two options here, right? We can create a personally owned work profile, right? Fully managed / corporate owned and corporate owned work profile devices, right? So for this, I'm going to show you guys just the personally owned work profile, and we'll create another demo. All right, so we'll create that. And then we can also use Defender for Endpoint, right? We can use Defender for Endpoint as part of that compliancy check if we are using Defender for Endpoint or tenant. And then here, example, similar to iOS, we can block rooted devices, right? This just means that the user has unlocked their device and they can do whatever that they want to do on the device, right? And that may pose a risk to a lot of organizations. So we see a lot of customers blocking rooted devices. You can also require Google Play services to be configured, device attestation. All right, just ensuring that the devices are legitimate devices. You can also define the maximum OS version. We can also require encryption, right? Requiring the device to be encrypted. We can also require the company portal app to be runtime integrity, right? Just meaning that it's an official signed application and not in debug mode, right? That's not a tampered company portal application as well. And you can also block USB devices, USB debugging on devices. Now, something really great that Endpoint Manager does, we can actually create the different profiles for different types of use cases, right? So we see some customers that they create profiles for maybe engineering team, right? Maybe it might be a gaming organization, right? The developers need full control of those tools and those feature sets on the devices. So you may create a policy for your developers, and then you might create a policy that is more restrictive, maybe for your frontline workers, right? Or you might create a much more much more restrictive policy for your IT organizations or whoever within your organization that needs to that meets your security requirements. All right. So once we create that, we can still take action as well. We can also push notification to the end user if the device is non-compliant, right? We can lock it, we retire the device. So just really great actions to take whenever whenever a device does not meet your corporate security policy. Once we have that, we can assign it the policy, and then we can create the policy. Okay. So go ahead and just not assign to anyone, and we'll go ahead and create it. All right. So next piece here I'm going to talk about is on the configurations. Configuration profiles offer a couple of things. Right? Configuration profiles are more of restrictions that you can define against your different platforms, against your devices. They're also a way to be able to create different capabilities, right? So let's say maybe you want to push out a VPN profile to your Android devices or your iOS devices. You can create that within the configuration profiles, right? And you can also leverage things such as SCEP. You can create different SCEP profile. If you need to push out any certificates within Intune, you can create that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to create a configuration profile. So here I'm going to create a iOS/iPad configuration profile. We also provide templates, right? So if you want to use our template capabilities that just has all the different configurations, you can leverage that. But I'm just going to go ahead and just go through this. I'll go ahead and go through some of the settings catalog. Or actually, I'll go to the templates, might be easier. So once we go here, I'm just going to go ahead and select the device features. And I'm just going to create a iOS restriction. Right. So on the iOS policies here we can create, we can define the different different homes. We can define how we want our home screen layout to look like, how what features we want to enable on device, what features do we not want to enable on device, right? For example, here, right, we want to restrict AirPrint to just specific IP. We can configure that. Here we've got a home screen layout. We can define how we want the layout to look like, 4 columns by 6. We have that capability, right? Maybe you have a device that is a dedicated device that needs to look a certain way, maybe a kiosk device. You can define that policy. You can define those configurations here. Now, just something really important to note, because the way how iOS has their how the iOS platform is set up, you see a lot of features you're able to take more configuration, more customization on the iOS platform when the device is when the device has been integrated with the Apple Business Manager, right? And Intune or Endpoint Manager can recognize that, hey, this device is actually owned by an organization, and the organization allows can and is able to configure the device beyond what traditionally what we can configure. All right. We also provide, if you want to provide single sign-on capabilities to certain applications, you can do that. We'll also provide a web content filter. These policies get applicable through Safari. All right. So if you want to block certain categories of apps, right? If you want to block certain apps, across Safari, you can specify those URLs, right? We can create it. Now here, we can also use what is called, you can assign policies against the devices. Right? So let's say maybe you might have a device, maybe you might have a user who has 3 or 2 devices, right? Maybe it might be an engineer who has a personal iOS device that is a developer, a device that's used for development, and they might have a personal iOS device that are both enrolled, right? How do you separate the two to apply the more restrictive policy or the less restrictive policy on the 2 separate devices? So we can use what is called filters, and we can actually create our filters. And depending on how we define our filters, we can say if a device is a corporate owner, or if the device is BYOD, then you can query against Azure AD to be able to target your policy against the specific types of devices. All right. So once we have that, then we can go ahead and create the policy, and we can assign that policy to our users. All right. And then another great thing here, right, with our cloud analytics, you can see a report of all the different policies that have been assigned. So next piece here, I'm going to show you guys on our Android capability. So we have Android has a different layout of how policies are assigned. For the fully managed, this is going to be for your corporate devices that are involved with that QR code that I showed earlier, right? And for the personally owned devices, personally owned work profile, this just means that Android and whatever restriction that you apply gets only applied within the work profile, not against the full device. That's the main difference to note between the iOS policies and the Android for work profiles. So let's say we want to create a device restriction, for example, right, within the work profile. So we create that policy. Let's go ahead and name this policy demo Android. All right. So here, for example, we'll see here, it only gives us the option to configure or restrict against the work profile, not against the full device. So we can block and we can minimize certain features between interaction between the work profile and the personal users. And this is really great how Android has managed to be able to separate the 2 containers. So such as, for example, we can block the camera within the work profile, right? But outside of that work profile, the user can still use their camera like it's normal, right? Maybe you want to block, maybe you don't want the users to be able to take certain pictures when they're using when they're in the work profile container. You can block that capability, right? Maybe you want to block screen capture. You can block that screen capture capability, and this will only be applicable within the work profile. Right? And you can also define a work profile password. So whenever the user launches their profile within the work profile, you can define that. You can set up a password for that, right? So let's say the user doesn't have a password on the device, but you can say, hey, because the user is accessing corporate resources, I want them to ensure that there's a password set when they access that content. So you can define that policy, that password policy. You can also define a password policy within the work profile, within the personal profile, right, at the device level. Now, the system security as well, you can prevent installation from unknown resources, unknown sources, right? Once we have those policies, you can assign the policies against the users. And similar to iOS, right, you can also use filters. All right. So next piece here, I'll show you guys a couple of things that we do offer within Endpoint. So we have what is called device categories. These are really great because this allows you to categorize your devices between personal device and company-owned device, right? So if you're issuing, maybe you might be issuing devices to your users to self-enroll. When the users self-enroll, they can select whether or not the device is personally owned or a corporate owned. And once you have that, you can actually automate and you can use dynamic device queries to assign policies against. So we saw those filters, right? To if you assign up, you can write a query in Endpoint Manager that says assign this policy, this restrictive policy to your corporate-owned devices, right? Or assign this policy against your personal-owned devices, and that will whenever a device gets enrolled and that device is defined as a corporate-owned, it will get applied to that specific policy. All right. Any questions so far, Lori? Do we have any questions from the teams, from anyone?
Nothing so far that I'm seeing here. You're explaining it so well. This is really great, Christian.
Awesome. So the next piece here will go, I'll talk about conditional access. So in conditional access, you can use conditional access and Endpoint Manager as a signal to be able to determine how devices are accessing resources. So I'm going to go ahead and create a simple policy in conditional access. Okay. I'm just going to do a device compliance. And what I want to do in this policy, what the outcome I wanted to achieve with this policy is before a user gets access to Office 365 or M365, I want that user to be able to access resources only if they're enrolled into MDM. All right. So I'm going to go ahead here in my user groups. I'm going to go ahead and just select my select a specific user group. I'm going to select it to my Intune Modern Workplace group. And then in the cloud apps, I want to select specific cloud applications. Now, something really great with Azure AD and Endpoint Manager, depending on whatever cloud apps that you define, whatever application cloud apps that are integrated with Azure AD, you can use that against the conditional access policy. All right. So let's say, for example, I'm going to target just Microsoft 365, right? Once I have that defined, and in my condition, I want to say, all right, I want to say my user who is accessing these resources within that Intune Modern Workplace group, if they're coming in from a iOS and Android device, and if they are coming from those two platforms, and I want them to access those cloud resources only if that device is compliant, marked as compliant. Now, what does this mean, right? This means that if these two users, or if the users in that AD group try to access email on their mobile device, what will happen is those users will be checked against my compliance policies that I had created earlier. Show you guys what that looks like. When I have that policy enabled, what that would happen is the users in that AD group, when they try to access email or any Office 365 resources on their mobile device, all right, whether they're using, if they're using an iOS or Android, what will happen is those users would check against whatever policies that they've been assigned to within this compliance policies, right, as one of the conditions. So once the user is compliant, what will happen is the user, once they meet the compliance, then the user can would be able to access those resources. Okay. Once we turn that on, then the policy is active. So right now I'm just going to turn it off. I'm just going to create it. All right. And this also, this conditional access, what we see a lot of customers use this is to force enrollment, right, against all users. If a lot of, we see some organizations that start pushing out and requiring users to enroll. Now, something really important as well to note is you can actually write a terms and conditions for your end users before they enroll. So let me go here. So you can actually create a terms and conditions for your users, just letting them know before they're enrolling what you can and can't see. And also you can get a report of the acceptance reporting, right? So you can see who accepted the reports, who didn't accept, things like that, right, before they enroll. Okay. The next piece here that I want to talk about is app protection policies. App protection policies are great for separating the container between the personal data within apps and corporate data applications, right? And this is really great for preventing data leakages. So here we've got two policies created, one for Android and one for iOS. And you see here, right, we're targeting any management type, right? But we also see some customers tend to go a mobile application management without enrollment, or as we call around Microsoft, MAMWE. Okay, so with app protection policies, what you can do is you can create app protection policies to preventing things such as preventing users from saving data to their public storage account or public cloud accounts, such as iCloud, Google Drive, right? We can block corporate data from being saved to it. So here in this policy here, we've got a couple of things that are going on. We're targeting Microsoft Excel, Outlook, and PowerPoint, and some of our Microsoft core applications. Okay. In the data protection, if you see here, we're preventing users from backing up, which means that when iCloud goes and tries to back up their applications or all your device data, it'll back up your personal data, but it would not touch any corporate data. Right? This is just ensuring that any corporate emails that you may have, that your end users may have, any sensitive data does not touch the public, their public environment. Okay. And we can also specify applications that we want to exempt against the policies. Okay. So here, for example, we've got some exemptions, right, such as maps, right? Maybe a user gets a direction in Outlook. Maybe you want the user to be able to use Apple Maps to get that direction. So we can also set certain exemptions to a policy. And then here, for example, we've blocked the ability to copies of data, only allowing users to save data to their corporate OneDrive for Business, right? Just ensuring that that data stays within the corporate environment rather than outside. We also have things such as restricting users from copying and pasting between apps. So here we've only allowed users to paste data in, but they won't be able to copy data out. All right. Also here we also have what is called access requirements, right? So these are the requirements that checks against what needs to be what the users must set up in order to access those applications, right? So here, for example, we set up a pin. You can actually set a pin against the application. So when a user launches an Outlook, they will be required to set up a pin for that, right? Or you can set up, you can block Face ID if you want to allow Face ID against those apps. And then also we have what is called conditional launch, right? This checks for certain conditions. Let's say we have a pin set up on the applications, and the user types in the pin incorrectly after 5 times. So if the user sets the pin incorrectly, what will happen is the app data gets wiped, and the user has to reset another pin. Right? They have to re-authenticate basically against Azure AD and then set up another pin. Why? Just to ensure that the user is who they are before accessing that data. Maybe somebody lost their device, for example. Right? And we see a lot of customers tend to try to prevent overlapping between MDM device restrictions and restrictive MAM policies. Right? So we see some customers, what they'll do is they would do for users who don't want to enroll the device, they'll offer them the ability for mobile application management, which means that only the Office 365 or the core applications, right, that are leveraging that Intune SDK against these app protection policies can have these restrictive on it, right? And rather, if the user is using MDM, then they tend to have a little bit more separate policy set for that. Okay. And once we have the policy set, we can also assign it to our AD group, and then then the app protection policies get applied right away. Okay. And then we can also see as well which users have checked into the policies. Right. So when the user gets the application, once you assign the policy, the user gets the application, or the user hits the application right away, and we can also start getting that data against which applications that they've checked in. And this is a bit similar as well for Android experience. The only main difference between our Android and our iOS is, for example, on the Android piece, you can actually prevent screen. I believe you can also prevent screen capture within that screen capture in Google Assistant against those applications. We can also do what is called preventing users from opening links only against Microsoft Edge with our both our app protection policies. Now, if we go back, there's a couple of things that I want to show you before we open up to some more questions. Now, if a user, for example, decides to leave the organization, or the user is terminated, and you want to ensure that the user, all the corporate data on that device is wiped, we have what is called app selective wipe. And in order to get app selective wipe, the user must be licensed, as well as the user must have an app protection policy assigned to them. So if the user has app protection policy and they've checked into the application, let's say the user has left the organization, the user is terminated, you want to wipe all the corporate email from their device. Here, let's say, for example, I'll take a user here, Alex. Right? Alex left the organization, and we want to see if Alex has signed out of all their devices, or we want to wipe all the corporate data from Alex's device. So you simply just select the user, and then Intune or Endpoint Manager will be able to showcase all the different the devices that the user is using and the applications in which the user is checked in, right? And then once you have all those, then you can create the wipe request. And what will happen is when Alex tries to authenticate to their email again, or tries to check email, the user will just all the application, the app will close, wipe all the data, and the user simply won't be able to access those corporate resources. Now, one last thing that I want to show you guys is how you can also enable conditional access for app protection policies. Now, let's say you want to just users don't feel comfortable with MDM in your organization. Right? You can definitely go mobile application management without enrollment. So you can do a man-we policy, and you can target our users. So I'm just going to target all users. In the cloud applications, I'm going to go ahead and target my M365 apps, Office 365. And in one of my conditions here, we have what is called client apps. So we can target, we'll go ahead and select our platforms. Let me go ahead and just select iOS and Android. So what we can do in this application here, we can say require the user to have an approved client app, and we can say the user must have app protection policy. So what will happen is when the user launches, if this condition is set up, once the condition is set up and a user tries to access email, the user necessarily doesn't have to enroll, right? What will happen is that email, if the user tries to add their corporate email into Outlook, then Outlook will check in with the app protection policy against that application. All right. This is also really great because if you want to prevent users from adding, preventing users from adding their email, their corporate email against a non-approved client app, right? Such as the native mail app. You want to prevent them from adding native mail and just using Outlook. You can definitely do that by using these conditions here, right? So if you want to do require app protection policies, we can do that. And also this is for requiring the users to only use those Microsoft 365 applications. So once we have that, we can turn that on or off, and then we'll create that policy. Right. So I know we have about 10 minutes. So before I pass it over to Lori, do we have any questions?
So far, no. We did have one about being able to use Intune to locate an Android and iOS device, but we've answered that particular question.
Awesome. Yeah. So with Intune, you can definitely locate those devices.
Right on.
So that concludes the end of the presentation. So I want to pass it over to Lori.
Thanks, Christian. Thank you. That was an awesome presentation and demo. At this particular time, I just want to point out that these are some of the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled. So DLP and Endpoint DLP, which will be June 9th, with our technical specialist, Hunter Hogan, and then Defender for Cloud Apps, June 23rd. And so we'll be placing the registration link inside of the chat. And if you'd like to continue to register for those particular ones, if you have not already. And then, of course, since we do have a few minutes left, about 8 minutes, feel free to ask any additional questions in the chat and we'll take them one by one. We'll be hanging out for a few minutes, probably 1 or 2 minutes if nothing comes through. And Christian, I just kind of wanted to ask you, again, great presentation here. And since you're super experienced and knowledgeable around the endpoint management piece, what is like one of your favorite features or a really cool feature within Endpoint Manager that you are just like, man, that's a great feature?
So one of my favorite features that I absolutely love is the work profile. Believe it or not, I'm a huge iOS Apple fan, their devices, but I would say that Android has done a really, really great job with their work profile. Simply just because the way and how they allow the enrollment, when you enroll the device, you have a clear separation and the user experience is very clear to know which applications are personally and which applications are corporate. As we know, sometimes users want to really have that clear visual separation of what's, what my organization manages versus what's mine. So I would say that the work profile is one of my favorite features.
Right on. I completely agree with that. And that's one of the questions that I have come across with some customers when they ask, what does it look like, right? And you nailed it right on the head there. The iOS piece, well, I'm an iOS, user too. I love my iPhone, but it doesn't have that where you're completely sure which one is which. And Android does do, working with some Android test devices, it does that beautifully. So you're very aware of what you're working and whether it's your personal stuff or your work stuff. And so it makes it a lot easier as an end user to navigate that.
Absolutely.
Right on. Well, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions here. Again, let me just put the registration form for the future webinars that we have left in this particular series. And then I'm going to put the feedback form in one more time again. Again, anything that any attendees can give us some feedback on, any information, we take it super seriously. We just want to make these better for you guys. So But it looks like after that, since there's no questions, we'll be concluding the session. The video recording will be made available to you for future reference. You can just re-click on the live link once this is over, and the recording should be there. It'll just open up another Teams screen and the recording will play. Or additionally, we do post them up in our YouTube channel. So for this particular one, I would probably give it until next week until that's up. And again, any additional questions, or if you require more information around anything that we've covered so far, iOS, Android, any Windows questions, or anything that we have over the Defender and identity on authentication pieces, reach out to your Microsoft sales specialist or your preferred partner that you might be working with. But with that, I'm going to, again, thank you, Christian, for the wonderful presentation. Hunter and Shay, thank you for helping the moderation in the chat. And thank you to the attendees for your time today. But have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lori.